I'm going to move on to another book on climate and health, but before I do that, I want to introduce two books which use this concept called One Health or Planetary Health. Essentially, it's the same thing we mentioned before in Tony McMichael's book as human ecology, where we consider not just human health, but how human existence relates to all other species, including the climate. So this is a book called Introduction to One Health, an interdisciplinary approach to planetary health. So the key word there is planetary health, and I think you can imagine where that comes from. They imagine a triad, for example, of the environment, health, and ecosystem. So you will have individual health, population health, and ecosystem health. In the first book, the focus was somewhat on population health, community health, and so on. The words are used rather interchangeably, but you get the idea here. The One Health umbrella includes environmental health, ecology, veterinary medicine, public health, human medicine, molecular and microbiology, and health economics as well. And then you have these two circles where you have bacteria, virus, vector-borne infections, antimicrobial. So these are all zoonotic infections with biothreats, parasite infections, global health issues like we are having with COVID, and interventions include surveillance, vaccine, therapeutic, sanitation, vector control, and we are going through the vaccinations right now for COVID as well. And then you have comparative medicine and translational medicine on this side, with metabolic disorders in humans and animals, joint and skeletal diseases in humans and animals, human-animal bond, environmental hazards exposure to humans and animals, cancer and cardiovascular diseases in humans and animals. So this is the really kind of a holistic attempt to think of humans and animals together. So when we talked about sixth extinction and so on in the previous book, this is what we want to be able to do, to manage the planet as one system and health as planetary health or One Health. Just to add a couple of details, these are the variety of sources of emerging infectious diseases as the world goes smaller with increasing globalization. So COVID has made it very clear as to how tightly we are coupled now and how quickly infectious diseases spread and waves keep going around. First wave, second wave, third wave, and so on and so forth. And there are many details, of course, here. Let's say human susceptibility to infection, international travel, commerce, land use change, which includes habitat loss, contacts with zoonotic diseases, bats. There are details, of course, there as well. Medical industry changes, war and famine, agricultural industry changes, breakdown of public health, bushmeat, also cause for jumping of viruses and bacteria and diseases from animals to humans, climate and weather, and of course with that comes drug resistance, food industry changes, human demographics and behavior. So the idea is to not separate all these issues into environmental issues and health issues, but hold them together. And this kind of a figure we saw before. Greenhouse gas emissions is now the big driver, with leading ocean acidification and other air pollutants like PM2.5, the particulate matter that we talked about, overall climate change, and there are feedbacks to climate change from the system with raised average and extreme temperatures, altered rainfall patterns, sea level rise, extreme weather, and so on. And you have various components in the middle that will, like food, heat waves, drought, fire, loss of resources like fishery, but augmented by aquacultural productivity, which comes with its own environmental issues as well, reduced physical work capacity because of the climate issues, reduced agricultural productivity, and so on. I won't read all of these, but obviously they need to undernutrition, which we repeatedly talked about, impact on mental health, which we mentioned, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, harmful algal blooms, which are increasing because of ocean warming, and nutrient runoff from pesticide use, fertilizer use, land use change, deforestation, agriculture, and of course vector-borne diseases. And there are always human actions involved, like social mediating factors, loss of habitation, poverty, mass migration, violent conflicts, and other social determinants of health. So this still doesn't give us a sense of how everything is connected, except for these feedbacks here, of course. But obviously, to evolve policies and action plans to manage this as one system is not as easy as putting such connections together. So that's a much trickier issue. The other book I would point to is called Planetary Health, Protecting Nature to Protect Ourselves. So this flips it around, saying that we cannot protect ourselves unless we protect nature, right? So this book provides this kind of a schematic with underlying drivers, which are consumption, demographic shifts, technology, population growth is part of that, of course. Ecological drivers include what we looked at in this figure. So we have global pollution, biodiversity loss, altered biogeochemical cycles, land use, land cover change, resource scarcities, including food production, and overall climate change, with proximate causes like air quality, food production, infectious disease exposures, access to fresh water, and natural hazards, with mediating factors translating into health effects, which include culture and behavior, technology, philanthropy, wealth, governance. For example, the entire response of the US, some sections of the US to mandates on wearing masks, and the violent reaction to it, consistent with the overall idea that government shouldn't be telling us what to do, even though it's good for us. So these are really what the mediating factors are that end up determining the overall health effects in terms of malnutrition, infectious disease, non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases like asthma and cardiovascular diseases, displacement and conflict, forced migrations, and mental health, of course. Okay, so that again gives you a sense of how everything is connected. The book also ends up relating ecosystem services, a concept that sounds wonderful in theory, which includes things like nutrient cycling, soil formation, primary production, so essentially life on Earth and biodiversity, where ecosystem services are valued because of their provisioning of food, fresh water, wood, fiber, fuel, medicine, and the regulating the services from the ecosystem include climate regulation, carbon sequestration by the trees and wetlands and ocean and so on, flood regulation, natural protection from storms by mangrove forests, coral reefs, salt marshes, disease regulation, water purification, culturally, aesthetic, spiritual, educational, and recreational. The difficulty, of course, is to put value on these non-market goods. How do you value? People love forests, but how much would they pay for a forest? Right? These are not easy questions. The links to constituents of well-being, which include security, basic material for good life, health, and good social relations, as well as freedom of choice and actions, are linked here with potential for mediation by socioeconomic factors as having strengths that are low, medium, and high, with the arrow widths representing the links that are either weak, medium, or strong. For example, the link from provisioning of the ecosystem services to health are strong, and from these positive impacts to health are strong as well, whereas from the provisioning to good social relations are not as strong. Okay, so here we include personal safety, secure resource access, security from disaster. Basic materials for good life include adequate livelihood, sufficient nutritious food, shelter, access to goods, And health, of course, includes strength, feeling well, access to clean air and water, and good relations, social cohesion, mutual respect, ability to help others. And under freedom of choice and action, we have opportunity to be able to achieve what an individual values doing and being. Well, COVID has exposed many of these issues. So this second book is fairly new and includes a section on how COVID represents the concept of One Health or planetary health as well. Okay, so here is a park that's closed in Clinton Township, New Jersey in April 2020 due to COVID-19. Just as the benefits of nature contact are more needed than ever, access to parks has been restricted because of this contagion or the pandemic going on. Obviously, the mental effects have been vast, economic impacts have been vast. It's clear that climate and migration and human movements exacerbate the COVID situation. Will something new emerge out of this COVID experience at global level or local and national levels in terms of monitoring policies, protecting environment and nature, medical services, ecosystem services, and so on and so forth? Not very clear, because the economic devastation would probably lead people to focus on economic recovery when COVID is done, hopefully soon. But in the meantime, the concept of One Health and planetary health is something good to keep in mind as a holistic way of thinking human ecology, our role and our behavior and how it affects our own ecosystem. We are not independent of other species and the ecosystem itself. So our health depends very much on the ecosystem health, and that's what the concept of planetary health or One Health is. So with that short introduction, I will leave this podcast and we'll move to the next book and look at some climate and health issues from a different perspective than One Health, planetary health, or the human ecology approach with the evolutionary timescale that we looked at in Tony McMichael's book. Okay.